So we are in Book 7, Canto 3. That is the canto which is describing Savitri in search of her soul. And in search of her soul, she has to pass through many layers of consciousness and of her being. And we have seen in this going through different layers, she had come to the level of life where we see a disorder, a complete disorder, things that exist in contradiction of each other. And Savitri sees that there is no question of finding the soul here. So she moves on. Out of the vastness of the silent self, life's clamor fled, her spirit was mute and free. Now she comes to the next level. You see, after even in the evolutionary process, what you see is after life comes the mind. But the mind principle also does not manifest at one go. There is a slow entry of the mind consciousness into life. It takes a slow control of life forces. It starts influencing and ordering life bit by bit. In fact, one of the functions of the mind principle is to bring an order in the life forces. But even in this evolution, we have seen the order has not yet set in, and life is quite a chaos, and it is not controlled by the mind fully, for two reasons perhaps. One is the mind itself has not manifested in its fullness. And secondly, even if the mind manifests itself in its fullness, it does not have the sufficient power to bring full life and the physical into order. There needs to be a power beyond mind which alone can settle the life forces. And that is what we will see now. What is that power beyond mind which can bring in order and change in life? So with that realization, Savitri moves on. And I take up the line with the new para. Then, journeying forward through the life's wide hush, through the self's wide hush, she came into a brilliant ordered space. There, life dwelt, parked in an armed tranquility. A chain was on her strong insurgent heart. Tamed to the modesty of a measured pace, she kept no more her vehement stride and hush. She had lost the careless majesty of her muse and the ample grandeur of her regal force. Curved were her mighty pomps, her splendid waist sobered the revels of her bacchant play. Cut down were her squanderings in desire's bazaar. Coerced her despot will, her fancy's dance, a cold stolidity bound the riot of sense. You can immediately guess what's happening. Life is tasting for the first time the mental force or the mental consciousness. So immediately there is a kind of a binding of the exuberant measures of life. So in each of these sentences that you see, Sri Aurobindo depicts how life forces get controlled. A chain was on a strong insurgent heart, tamed to the modesty of a measured pace. You see, everything is controlled, measured by the mind, and everything has to be ordered. So she kept no more her vehement stride and rush, and she had lost her careless majesty of her muse. You see, this is what is life left to itself. There is a majesty, there is a vehemence, there is a rush, there is an unmeasured pace, but all that comes under control. And as we see again, curbed were her mighty palms, her splendid waist. Yeah, the life itself plays widely. So all that, every line tells the same thing. Cut down were her squanderings in desire's bazaars, coerced her despot will, etc., etc. Her spirit's bounds they cast in rigid lines. A royalty without freedom was her lot. The sovereign throned obeyed her ministers. Her servants' mind and sense governed her house, and guarded with a phalanx of armored rules, the reason's balanced reign kept order and peace. So till now, in the evolution, what was supposed to be her servant, the beginning of the mind and the body and the physical, now the mind, who was till now a servant, is slowly governing her, changing her rules. The ministers become their rulers, and then everything is over. I mean, the beauty of life, the freedom of life is gone. Her will lived closed in adamant walls of law. Coerced was her force by chains that feigned to adorn. Imagination was prisoned in a fort, her wanton and licentious favorite. Reality's poise and reason's symmetry was set in its place, sentineled by martial facts. They gave to the soul for throne a bench of law, for kingdom a small world of rule and line. The age's wisdom, shriveled to scholiast lines, shrank patterned into a copybook device. You see, what a beautiful description of the shrinking of the life energies, life forces. How it really, I mean, if there is an overruling of mind, and I mean, this is, I think, where Sri Aurobindo comes into picture, where we don't want the over-dominance of the mind in the name of rationalization, reason, mental consciousness, order. We burden life and we kill it. I mean, we are channelizing it so much that life loses its spontaneity. So all these lines are really a poor organization of life. And I see, I don't have to explain, each one tells for itself, you see. Imagination was prisoned in a fort. I mean, there is imagination and freedom of creativity and all that. It is kind of put under, as he puts it here, a bench of law. Everywhere rules and regulations. What you should do, should not do, ethics, morality. And then even if there is art, if there is creativity, everything under laws. So this is what we call the rationalization of life. And perhaps we are overdoing that. We have overdone that already and lost the genius and the freshness of life. I mean, sometimes I've seen I've seen a couple of photographs and movies some Westerners have taken of this so-called our poverty-stricken children. Well, where I can see there is no mentalization, rationalization of life, you can feel life in its wild nature. But one comment I always remember made by one of the photographers, he said, "This kind of a smile in the child's eyes I can never get in Western children. You know, these children are poor, hardly dressed. But he was comparing, saying, this smile in their eyes, this naturalness, this spontaneity is extraordinary. And this does not compare with the children there, because there is a kind of the mind burdened being. Whereas here the children are absolutely spontaneous. The mind does not burden their life. So yes, that was a real comment that I had heard many years back, but that has gotten stuck in my mind. That if there is an overburdening of rationalization and treating the children under don'ts and do's and this is right, this is wrong, you are killing the spontaneous nature of life. So Sri Aurobindo in all his things is telling us the same thing. They give to the soul for throne a bench of law. You see, L capital, all kinds of rules and regulations and law. So we have to leave life to develop itself. And what I was telling you, the genius of Sri Aurobindo is this, that he recognizes the necessity of the mind. But as it is understood, mind tends to go towards uniformity, not unity. So this is the danger of the mind, because it wants to run into a uniformity because it's easy for the mind to control. If there's uniformity everywhere, one single bell and then everyone hears the same thing. But if there's no uniformity, there's unity and variety, then each case you have to take up and do it. Mind doesn't have the patience. So it strikes at the law of uniformity and thereby killing the life element. And so we see here, for kingdom a small world of rule and line. There is no real kingdom offered to the human mind, human being. Everywhere rules, law, the age's wisdom, shriveled to scholastic line. You see the wisdom of the Gitas or the Bible or the scriptures and the ancient rishis, the munis, the spiritual masters. All that has become a scholiast line, you know. A scholiast is one who gives commentaries. So that means after the wisdom, what comes is the scholar, the scholiast, the commentator. And in India we have that very beautifully exampled. We have the Rig Vedas or the Vedas, we have the Upanishads, we have the Gita, and then we have the schools of philosophy. 6 schools, 8 schools, 10 schools, whatever the number of schools, where all the schools of philosophy, they rationally explain the wisdom. They rationalized wisdom. And that means they wrote bhashyas. Bhashyas are the commentaries. So each new great scholar was nothing but a commentator on the Upanishads. Even Shankaracharya, the great philosopher, of course, he has his own experience, I am not discussing that. But it became a tradition to have bhashyas, commentaries. So that's the kind of a very natural sequence I am seeing that comes in all spiritual institutions. You have first the wisdom, the experience of the masters. But then comes the age of the scholars, where you have only scholarships, commentaries, you have discussions, analysis, where the mind starts coming in, pushing back the intuition and the revelation. So that's what Sri Aurobindo is telling us. Mind also is doing that. It shrank the pattern into a copybook device. The Spirit's almighty freedom was not there. A schoolman, mind, had captured life's larger space. but chose to live in bare and paltry rooms, parked off from the too vast, dangerous universe, fearing to lose its soul in the infinite. You see, all this commentaries is this kind of shrinking. And the shrinking mind, and the mind shrinks life so that it is under its control. Because the freedom of life, which is, Sri Aurobindo would call it as infiniteness. So this infinite, boundless freedom of life expression is narrowed down, is shrunken, is put into rules and laws and into notebooks and commentaries. So the mind feels, at last I have controlled mind and controlled life. But it's not controlling, it's not ordering. Because an order is where you have to take the variety of life. And that alone is really the spiritual life. Rest of all the things, be it religion, be it ethics, morality, mind. Because after all, what is ethics and morality? It's a pure mind-born thing. Mind-manufactured rules. They have hardly any spiritual law behind that. So wherever we have in India the great Manu Shastra, the Shastra is written by somebody called Manu. Of course, he was a great Muni and a Rishi. But it was again the mental laws. So here, we are doing the same thing, fearing to lose its soul in the infinite. We have parked off, we have put them everything into closed lines. Even the idea's ample sweep was cut into a system chained to fixed pillars of thought or riveted to matter's solid ground. Or else the soul was lost in its own heights, obeying the ideal's high-browed law. Thought based a throne on unsubstantial air, disdaining earth's flat triviality. It barred reality out to live in its dreams. An extraordinary, you see, what is, wonderful with this Savitri is these lines sweep along centuries of history. 2 lines and you can write a whole book on this human evolution. I mean, that's the sweeping knowledge, wisdom we see. For example, I'll highlight these lines once again. Even the idea's ample sweep was cut into a system, chained to fixed pillars of thought. Now, that is one thing where we get all this question of the schools of thought. All that, the idea, I capital, remember, is not just a mental idea. That means the supreme ideas, which actually belong to the supermind. Even those ideas, we have cut them and put them into a system. And chained to fixed pillars of thought. Again, pillars of thought, we again have the schools of thought. We now have, this is a major thought, this is Platonian, this is Plato, this is Socrates, this is this. So we are now labeled each of these ideas because it's so easy to make a systematic analysis of the Western philosophy, systematic study of Indian philosophy. So we are very eager to put everything into a line, into a system, into a chronology, into some order. Because we want to write a book saying, right from 14th century to the 19th century. But spirit doesn't move in this kind of an order that we have brought in. And that's what Sri Aurobindo shows in his own books of Human Cycle, Idol of Humanity and all that. How there is a manifestation of the aspect of the spirit in different countries, in different cultures. It doesn't follow this kind of a mental order. It is we who are building up the system. And then wonderfully says, or riveted to matter's solid ground. Or else the soul was lost in its own heights. In its own heights in what way? Obeying the ideal's high-browed law, thought based a throne on unsubstantial air, disdaining earth's flat triviality. That's the philosophy. So you speak so much of philosophy, your transcendent, your Brahman, your this consciousness, that consciousness, which has nothing to do with earth life. So either this thought has been pulled down to earth, as he puts it beautifully, riveted to matter's solid ground. So we have philosophies of life which are pulled down to earth, riveted to matter, make you earthly, nothing else, or they have taken man to those unsubstantial air, to those thin air, into that ether air, which has nothing to do with earth. So they are either beyond earth or on earth. So these are the philosophies that we see, that we are everywhere here. Disdaining earth's flat triviality. And this is the comment that Sri Aurobindo makes in this Renaissance in India, that the Western mind in the initial stages thought Indian philosophy to be this, always floating in thin air, in the unsubstantial air, nothing to do with life as such. So there was a criticism that Indian philosophy, Indian life is unearthly, beyond into that unsubstantial air, whereas the Western philosophy is grounded on life. But Sri Aurobindo defends, saying it cannot be possible that if India has reached those heights of Himalayan peaks in its philosophic thought, it has a huge base of life. Because a simple image that has stuck to my mind since the last 40 years, he says the Himalayan peaks, your Kanchenjunga, your Mount Everest, they are standing at that height of 8,000 meters or whatever. But they have a huge range of Himalayas below. He says such a peak cannot be existing on a narrow base. You see, that's the simple argument he makes. The base has to be wide enough to have a peak so high as that. So he said, this is Indian life. So we have these great philosophers of Vedanta and Vedas and Rig Vedas. But because the base of social structure, the base of social philosophy, the base of individual life is vast. So he says, and then starting from here, he writes a whole book, Renaissance in India, the foundations of Indian culture, where he shows what is the basis upon which Indian culture stands. And because of this large base, that we could have those huge high peaks of thought, of ideals. So he says, life's, now coming to that, it barred reality out to live in its dreams, or all stepped into a systemed universe. Life's empire was a managed continent. Its thought an army ranked and disciplined. Uniform they kept the logic of their fixed place, at the bidding of the trained centurion mind. It's the same thing is comparing with the Roman army, the centurion mind, that you see Roman army, all of you know very well, how the army was there, one solid block. But at one order, one little order from their master, the whole thing would move. So it was absolute 100% uniformity and 100% law. But all that, the law of the mind. So he says our life has become like that because of the reason, rationalization. And or each stepped into its station like a star, or marched through fixed and constellated heavens, or kept its feudal rank among its peers in the sky's unchanging cosmic hierarchy. Or like a high-bred maiden with chaste eyes, forbidden to walk unveiled the public ways, she must in close secluded chambers move, her feeling in cloisters live, or garden paths. Well, this is what reminds us of our palaces and queens and kings. The queens were allowed, what is that called, zanana? The women's place, that they cannot come into the public, they cannot come into the view of the men, they cannot be seen by men. So they had their own gardens. If you see our Indian palaces, you will see this kind of a sectionalized place, palaces, where only this was a women's kingdom, their beautiful park, their gardens and all that. So what Sri Aurobindo is using is, forbidden to walk unveiled the public ways like high-bred maidens. So now our life, where we have put in ethics and morality, you should do only this much and not go into the public. If you want to have your desires and all that, go into the closed doors, but don't come into the public. If you want to have this kind of a thing, put it in the closed rooms. So there has been a little freedom allowed to life, but in its parameters, in its closed chambers. Life was consigned to a safe level path. It dared not tempt the great and difficult heights, or climb to be neighbor to a lonely star, or skirt the danger of the precipice, or tempt the foam-curled breaker's perilous laugh, adventurous lyrist, dangerous amateur, or into a chamber call some flaming god, or leave the world's bounds and where no limits are. Meet with the heart's passion the adorable, or set the world ablaze with the inner fire. I mean, I think you must read Savitri, read it loud. I mean, there is such a rhythm, such poetry. I mean, it is compelling, I'm just carried by the rhythm of the sound. So you see, the image is the same, the explanation is the same. But how many images he brings in to explain? Life was consigned to a safe, level path. It dared not tempt the great and difficult heights, or climb to be neighbor to a lonely star. You see how life is controlled. Don't dare too much. This is not your adventure. You cannot aspire too much. This is the life that has been given to you. That has been very much so. I can speak for Indian life and Indian culture, Indian civilization. Our women, our society have been consigned to this kind of a safety path. You have to have this kind of a, there are so many stupid things I can't even utter them. Pati, you treat your husband like a god. Don't dare ask him, don't dare question him. I mean, even now there are, I'm sure, societies in our villages where the wife is not supposed to take the name of the husband. With this belief that if you take the name, some evil force will attack your husband. It's kind of don't announce the name so that the evil force does not. And you have again your Karwa Chauth or something, there is a special day puja where you worship for the longer longevity of your husband's life. I said, what about your own life? You don't want to live long? So they have a special function. You look at the moon, you don't eat the whole day. The wife doesn't eat, she goes on fasting. Until she sees the moon at night, she cannot take. I said, look, all these things, what are you trying to do? Exactly this thing. Or climb to be neighbor to a lonely star, or skirt the danger of the precipice, or tempt the foam-curled breaker's perilous laugh. You see, no danger, no adventurism, no new path. You are given a set of rules and you follow them blindly. So all this, no adventures lyrist, no dangers amateur, or into a chamber call some flaming god. You see, there's a beautiful this thing. You see, it's not the question of romance. It's not calling some lover into your chamber, into your house. But it's this next line which says, meet with the heart's passion, the adorable. So you are given a set of rules, you are given a set of gods, you are given a set of pujas, and you stick to that in the name of saying, this is the family god, this is the family tradition, we have this god for the past 3 generations, so you should worship only this god and none else. So you have no freedom for religion, no freedom of thought, no freedom of function. All that is gone. Meet with the heart's passion, the adorable, or set the world ablaze with the inner fire. You see, that is only like a Mirabai. She set the world ablaze with her inner fire. The few women who came out of the society, who brought in Sri Krishna, who brought in Sri Ram, that inner fire, the adorable. So they could break the social law. Mirabai, as most of you would know, she was a princess. She was married into a great king. But she, in her childhood, had married Lord Krishna. Even when she was 6 or 7 years, once she was sitting in a room and in her house and she sees a procession going down with Lord Krishna, somebody carrying Krishna's statue, as you see in our own temple here. You should come to Pondicherry once on 5th of this month, 5th of March, right in the street of Sakar, if you want to see a procession of gods. There are 100 gods. You can count them 1 to 100, not one, not more. All of them going in their chariots, beautifully decorated. Different gods, names you don't even know. But they all go, 100 of them, take a sea bath on the seashore. So none of you are allowed, It's not in the West. It's human beings who go and take a bath on the seashore. In India, it's the gods who go and take a bath. They have a lovely summer bath and then cool down, prepared themselves for the summer, they go back to their temples which are around Pondicherry, 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers. So they travel throughout the night. And please don't travel to Pondicherry in the evening hours. Most of the roads are blocked. On the main ECR road if you go, and Jipmer road you go, they're all blocked because the gods are returning to the temples. So you will be allowed to go, but you have to take a lot of round and winding stairs there. So what I want to tell you is, what Sri Aurobindo calls here, they set the world ablaze with this inner fire. So this kind, of course I'm giving you examples from Indian life, Indian society, Indian womanhood, but I'm sure you can apply this to your own society and find out that this oppression of the mind, I mean, I'm sorry to say, I find in our own eastern country, I won't name it, I've been there many times, I feel so much of this mind. In fact, I told them there, I said, you are a mind-manacled society. It's a mind-manacled society everywhere. You have fines, you have this, you have rules, you have regulations, you have punishments. So you see only a uniformity there. And we in India are used to see variety. I mean, sometimes, and when I look back to America and I said, look, it's so difficult to find out your house in America because each of the houses is same, except you have 1026, 1027, 1025, and that too today you can have on your GPS house numbers 1026, you can go straight. But you come to my colony, no house is similar to the next one. I mean, you can have 100 houses that are 101 designs. Absolute variety, colors, shape. So I'm trying to see this what India has been known for, unity and multiplicity. I said, how far is it true? But come to my little lane, and when there are, this Masimagam pujas or the New Year, the Christmas year, they do that kolam. I'm sure you have seen that kolam, and it's a magnificent thing. Each house has a different kolam, and little girls, age of 9, 10, 15, they come out, do beautiful drawings. Some of them have peacocks, some of them have a cross, some of them have, depending on the pujas. But where does this art come from? Nobody copies the other, but absolute variety and expressing such art. I mean, art in daily life is not a beautiful picture on the wall for forever. This art is there for 5 minutes. By the time she walks into the house, her motorcycle goes and destroys the colors. But she doesn't look back and whine and weep and say, oh, what a work I've done and it's spoiled. It's done, given to God, it's none of my business. I mean, it's so much to learn from them, We are so much, we put a wall, put a painting, we put our name and the date and take a picture and put a... But these guys, it's simple. So I'm trying to learn that, yes, there are other factors of life where you should allow life to flourish. So here we say all these things. So all these things the mind has done to life. A chastened epithet in the prose of life, she must fill with color just her sanctioned space, is it? Just her sanctioned space. Not break out of the cabin of the idea, not trespass into rhythms too high or vast, even when it soared into ideal air. Thought's flight lost not itself in heaven's blue. It drew upon the skies a patterned flower of disciplined beauty and harmonic light. You see, disciplined beauty, not wild beauty. A temperate, vigilant spirit governed life. This is the essence of all the description that we are getting here. A temperate, vigilant spirit governed life. That's the mind, it always is governing life. Its acts were tools of the considering thought, too cold to take fire and set the world ablaze. I think he likes this phrase, set the world ablaze. It's coming second time here. Or the careful reason's diplomatic moves, testing the means to a prefigured end, or at the highest pitch some calm will's plan, or a strategy of some high command within to conquer the secret treasures of the gods, or win for a masked king some glorious world, not a reflex of the spontaneous self, an index of the being and its moods, a winging of conscious spirit, a sacrament of life's communion with the still supreme, or its pure movement on the eternal's road. So of course he's gone with the same idea, taking it a little deeper, and I'll come back to that. Let me finish the para here. He says, or else for the body of some high idea, a house was built with two close-fitting bricks. Action and thought cemented made a wall, or small ideas limiting the soul. Even meditation mused on a narrow seat, and worship turned to an exclusive God. To the universal in a chapel prayed, whose doors were shut against the universe. I mean, it's really, when I read that, this tremendous sense of pathos. It's pathetic, We want to close the universal in a closed door. Call it church, call it temple, call it this, call it that. When we say God is here, and we build a beautiful decorated house, and we call him universal, but the doors are closed on him. Look at this pathetic sentence where it says, to the universal, what is it? Even meditation mused in a narrow seat, and worship turned to an exclusive God. You cannot meditate in nature. You are given meditation programs and seminars and workshops by seminar, and you are given a seat. You sit here. You cannot. Why can't you sit there in nature, under the tree, under the same famous Bodhi tree somebody sat there for 6 years? But all that's gone. And worship turned to an exclusive God. This is the tragedy again. We want my God, your God, this God, that God, exclusive God. It's not if he had used the word turn to God, it would have been wonderful. But we don't turn to God, we turn to exclusive God. That is the religiosity. That is a narrowness. And then worst thing he says, to the universal, U capital, in a chapel prayed, whose doors were shut against the universe. You see, what a understanding we have. In fact, in South India there are temples who do not allow foreigners, who do not allow another caste, who do not allow this caste. I mean, really, one thing we believe, God is this, He is universal, He is transcendental, He is all the blah blah. And then you don't allow your own another human being. So you close the doors on the other human beings, and you close the doors for the God to come out. You have to be here. We'll bring you milk and food and sleep and bed is yours. Because outside the temple is our world, the human world. We will do what we want. So we have given you a very comfortable chamber thing. Nowadays, I don't know if you have put the AC inside, but they put at least the fan for the gods inside. Made him comfortable. Don't you dare come out, because we want to be there. And see the next line also. Or kneel to the bodiless impersonal, a mind shut to the cry and fire of love, a rational religion dried the heart. I mean, he can hit the nail on the head. One line to describe the whole of religion. A rational religion dried the heart. You see, if you want to be too much religiosity, and then in this book, where is that? I don't know, it's not I Love Humanity, Human Cycle, where it describes the growth of religion. How in the beginning it is, it is pantheistic, we are very open, there's of course an element of fear, and then slowly it says, mind comes in to rationalize religion. Where we have all the religious scriptures, mind comes in. And then it says, the moment mind comes in, religion loses its intuition. It loses its spontaneous love. It loses its devotion to the divine. Because instead of having a devotion to the Lord in front, you are now barred with all those rules, how you must sit in the church, how you must go to the temple. You know, if people go into the temple just barehanded, you will be laughed at. The pujari will say, what, you have not brought your thali of coconut? You see, so all these rules preempt you. So we are losing what Sri Aurobindo writes here, dried up the heart, because we are so much reminded of the rules. He says, a rational religion dried the heart. It planned a smooth life's acts and ethics rule, or offered a cold and flameless sacrifice. You see, he is very sharp in that. Offered a cold and flameless sacrifice. Flameless without devotion. There is no aspiration. And you have a sacrifice, you have put your things. As you know, people demand, put offerings, put this, put that. But there is no flame here. It's cold. You have just fulfilled the ritual. You have satisfied yourself. You have satisfied your community. You have satisfied your neighbor. That yes, my daughter-in-law goes to the temple every Sunday, my son goes to the temple. So it's a kind of a social custom. So there is a kind of what we say, a mechanized worship. So he says, are offered a cold and flameless sacrifice. The sacred book lay on its sanctified desk, wrapped in interpretations, silken strings, a credo sealed up its spiritual sense. I mean, brilliant. I mean, he is master of poetry. I cannot believe. The sacred book lay on its sanctified desk. It's there. We have kept Savitri on its pedestal. We have put Gita on its level. We have put the Bible in its place. And what is it? Wrapped in interpretation, silken strings. You see, we have all got our own interpretations. Gita has hundreds of them, Bible has hundreds of them. Quran, not many, because you are not allowed to interpret that. But Gita, Bible, we have got. But everybody has interpretations, but we lack the experience. We go by Sri Aurobindo's interpretations, or Tagore's interpretation of the Gita, or Gandhiji's, and we give talks and essays on the Gita, that Gita. But how many of us are trying to understand through experience? So he's telling us with a mockery that we have tied up, wrapped up these sacred things in interpretations, and a credo sealed up a spiritual sense. The spiritual experience, the inner being is sealed up. And now we understand very easily, very clearly, why Sri Aurobindo had never read the Vedas until he experienced them. Otherwise, he too would have been wrapped up in an interpretation of the Vedas by so and so. He said, I don't want to go through any interpretations. So he experienced the essence of the Vedas and the Gita. Then only he started reading the Vedas and the Gita, and then all that happened in the jail and all that. So we see how we are dealing with our religion, so-called mind. We take pride, and we'll see the next para, mind at its atrocious moment. This is mind dabbling with life, trying to order, taking away all this beauty, making life a kind of a uniformity. So this is a beautiful description of the stage of life where mind is dominating, trying to bring order, trying to bring itself. But and then it becomes so very atrocious. In the next line we will see where mind says, I am the soul. See, to that extent mind has been adamant, and where it says, here was a quiet country of fixed mind. Here life no more was all, nor passion's voice. A cry of sense had sunk into a hush. Soul was not there, not spirit, but mind alone. Mind claimed to be the spirit and the soul. And this is what Sri Aurobindo is trying to break through his thick volume called The Life Divine. He wrote that huge volume only to break this adamant claim of the mind that I am the spirit and I am the soul. So you see, Sri Aurobindo has labored to break this audacity of the mind, claiming itself the highest and the best and the soul and nothing else. When you see lines later, the spirit saw itself as a form of mind, lost itself in the glory of the thought, a light that made invisible the sun. Into a firm and settled space she came, where all was still and all things kept their place. Each found what it had sought and knew its aim. All had a final stability. Well, you see, is your book giving the alternative reading at the bottom of the page? No? Or do you have these lines? This narrowed life's pedestrian thought and will debauched into a little continent space where soul was not, nor spirit and thinking. These lines are not there? We have an alternative version. Or these lines are there, or which are this? The one that I read out are there. Yeah, this narrowed life's pedestrian thought and will. You have those lines, isn't it? Debauched into a little continent space. You have these lines? No, the one that I read out. Okay. Yeah. So there is. We have another version of this paragraph. 12 lines are rewritten. So. Now, there one stood forth who bore authority on an important brow and held a rod. Command was incarnate in his gesture and tone. Tradition's petrified wisdom carved his speech. His sentences savored the oracle. You see, this is now the pure mind which is really audacious, which claims everything. And what does it say? Traveller or pilgrim of the inner world, fortunate art thou to reach our brilliant air, flaming with thought's supreme finality. So this is the mind which is speaking to Savitri. So praising, you are the traveller, pilgrim of the inner world, fortunate you are because you have reached our level. O aspirant to the perfect way of life, here find it. Rest from search and live at peace. Ours is the home of cosmic certainty. You note these words, certainty and bare authority and all that. Here is the truth. God's harmony is here. Register thy name in the book of the elite, admitted by the sanction of the few. Adopt thy station of knowledge, thy post in mind, thy ticket of order draw in life's bureau, and praise thy fate that made thee one of ours. You see, what a great welcome, You have become one of ours, you are a brilliant person. So kind of, giving her the credit that Savitri, you have dared to come here and this is the world of truth. God's harmony is here. We welcome you to become one of ours. All here docketed and tied, the mind can know, all schemed by law that God permits to life. This is the end and there is no beyond. The last word of the mind. You see, that is the audacious claiming. This is the last thing. This is the end. Nothing beyond. Here is the safety of the ultimate wall. Here is the clarity of the sword of light. Here is the victory of a single truth. Here burns the diamond of flawless bliss, a favorite of heaven and nature live. I mean, what a really, Sri Aurobindo has very sharp criticism, where mind is telling, here is the safety of the ultimate wall. Here is the clarity of the sword of light. So there is light here. And this is the pointed line I want you to say. Here is the victory of a single truth. So mind is that uniformity. Is a single law, single truth, single thing. It does not allow this kind of a variety, variation, anything. So mind believes in this singularity of truth, singularity of vision, singularity of expression, singularity of interpretation. So if you do not agree with me, you are an infidel. You should not exist. You should be out. So this is the claim of all religions and mind. And so it says, here is the victory of a single truth. Here burns the diamond of flawless bliss. You see what audacity mind claims to have the bliss of the divine, Satchitananda. But it says, claiming, it says, I am the person who to deliver everything. A favorite of heaven and nature live. So it's inviting Savitri to live in this beautiful mental world, which is the best. But to the too satisfied and confident sage, Savitri replied, casting into his world sight's deep release, a heart's questioning inner voice. For here the heart spoke not, only clear daylight of intellect reigned here, limiting, cold, precise. That's the 3 words are beautiful of the mind. Cold, precise, limiting. This is exactly what the mind is. It limits, is cold, because there is no heart in the mind. And then of course is precise. So all these things are the mind's thing. What does Savitri say? Happy are they who in this chaos of things, this coming and going of the feet of time, can find the single truth, the eternal law. So you see the same word here, the single truth. So Sri Aurobindo is bringing back tauntingly about the single truth. So Savitri too said, yes, you can find here the single truth, the eternal law. Untouched that live by hope and doubt and fear. So Savitri is praising it. He says, yes, fine, I can imagine those people who find this eternal law, the single truth and all that. Happy are men anchored on fixed belief in this uncertain and ambiguous world, or who have planted in the heart's rich soil one small grain of spiritual certitude. So it's good, Savitri is telling, in this uncertain world, if you can find one truth, one central truth, and in this uncertain world, something certain. Then twice Sri Aurobindo says, happy are they, happy are men. Third time he says, happiest who stand on faith as on a rock. That's as on a rock means a singular truth. It's not just a rock of faith of any religion, but rock of faith of single truth. So they are also happy. They are the best persons. All this is good. Your rationalization, singularity, eternal truth, and as it puts here, the single truth. But, and this is the but. But I must pass, leaving the ended search. Truth's rounded outcome firm, immutable, and this harmonic building of world fact, this ordered knowledge of apparent things. That's the line that applies to the mind. So Savitri says, yes, you have all this certitude, you have a single truth, you have an eternal truth. But what is this? Ordered knowledge of apparent things. It is a line for your thesis. This is exactly the whole of this mental creation, civilization. That we are ordering, trying to bring an order of apparent things, with the word appearance and reality. So this word apparent itself can lead you into tremendous philosophy. Is this world an appearance? Then what is the reality? Why is it an appearance? What is form? What is spirit? What is behind all these things? So the mind doesn't question the reality of these apparent things. And it takes these apparent things to be the true things, the reality. And then it tries to order. How can mind order things which are not true, which are only apparent? Because behind this apparent thing that we have here, there is a deeper truth. There is a different reality which mind can never ever dream of ordering. So why is this conflict? Why is this contradiction of life? Because mind is trying to do something which is not its business. It may think it is business, but it is not in its capacity to do. Because how can this mind lay hand on the supreme reality? So Sri Aurobindo calls it the life divine. Because life is the center, not the mind. He doesn't say in the book, the mind divine. Because mind is not the divine. So this life has to be changed by a supermind. So Sri Aurobindo takes you from the life element to the mental philosophy and then to the supreme supramental philosophy. That is book 2, part 2 is his supermind philosophy. So he calls it very suggestively the life divine. Because mind has failed to order life. So Sri Aurobindo wants to bring in a solution now. How can you order this life and make it into divine life? So you see, it's very suggestive not to use the word. Otherwise, as per the evolutionary echelon, it should have been the mind now. But Sri Aurobindo goes back a step below. Because he wants to deal with life. Because this life which is being ordered, but mind has failed miserably. So he calls it here. So Savitri, you see, she hits the nail on the head. And then she says, here I can stay not, for I seek my soul. This phrase has come so many times, I seek my soul. I mean, it's recurring. But how the poet uses it so brilliantly. But when you seek your soul, neither the mind, neither life, nor the subliminal, all these are the passages in the tunnel, which you have to pass. Every seeker has to pass through this. You cannot just jump over them. So Savitri also is being taken through these evolutionary processes and then shown the limitations of mind, the chaos of life, the subliminal, the inconscient. And each time she is shown all these things because she knew that first she must discover her soul. Only who save themselves can save others. So if there's any question of real work in this world, you have to have the realization of the soul. Nothing else works. So, but this is easy to say. But Savitri had discovered all this herself. That's why she can come to the conclusion. Without seeing, if she had said that, it would have been a hollow fact, an inexperienced utterance of the mind like all of us do. But Savitri is not doing that. She is going through this passage herself. And then she says, I have seen this whole gamut of life, evolutionary life. But ultimately I realize it's only by getting one's soul, by realizing one's soul, I can be of real service to humanity, save others. Well, we'll stop that at that point here. Yeah. I think just mark your lines because I think it's easy. Yes, we have one more section here which I feel maybe in our next class we'll complete this session. We don't have much time, but I just might tell you that next time, next 9th is our Monday, I suppose. Today we are 2nd, yeah. We'll be having our kind of, not the last class is the wrong word, but a break, a summer break. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm having to go out of country for a while. Of course, it's not too long. I'm going out for 2 weeks. But I'll be coming back on the 1st of April. I'm going out on 15th of March. But after 1st of April, we have 2 classes. Anybody has a calendar, mobile calendar? Yeah. Just see April. On the 7th is the next one, I think. 7th is a Monday. Monday is 6th. 6th also I'm not here. So after that, 13th, yes, I'm here. So 13th I can have, 20th I can have, and then again I'm going out for some talks. So what I want to tell you is, I will have April 2 sessions, that is 13th and 20th. Next time is the last class, after next 9th a break, then we meet on 13th of April, then again on 20th of April, and again I am out for, I don't know, till what? Till May? What's happening, guys? Shruti, remember? Then after that, Bangalore. May I am here, na? So May I'll be here. So no, I'm not going in May to Hyderabad. I'll go in June most probably. However, so in April we'll have only 2 classes, 13th and 20th, right? Then again whole of April is gone. Again I'll come back in May. So May first week. May 4th, isn't it? Yeah. So I don't know if you'll remember all these dates, so I'll have to tell you one by one. So I'll not confuse you because some people will come and say, next time do we have a class or not? Yes. On 9th, we have a class. After the 9th, we take a break till 13th of April. Clear? Yeah. So I think you don't have to send any reminder to Notes and News. So those of you who remember, come, welcome.